Hey neighbors, Kevin here with etrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Redarc BCDC Alpha50 in-vehicle DC battery charger here on our 2021 Ram ProMaster 2500. So the Alpha series is going to come in only 2 amperage settings for just right now. The one I have in my hands right now is a 25 amp, and then the one we installed was 50 amps. So that's going to be the output going towards your battery from the alternator and start battery of your vehicle. Now these are designed to be mounted up in the engine compartment, and Redarc's even took it another step further and built up a few different mounts. So this even has a couple of options for holes on when you want to mount this up depending on what your vehicle is. And then this will kind of help put it away a little bit further, so maybe it's not near something that's going to be super hot, or maybe you have a little bit of wiring or something you're kind of working around and still need to be able to get that mount in place in a tight compartment. So there's a bunch of different options with that, and along with that they've even come up with a few different wiring kits, and these are all going to be based on the amperage that you're choosing, so that 50 amp or the 25 amp, and then what the length is going to be. So if you look on the back of the box, they show you if your batteries are sitting side by side, then go with this specific kit. If maybe they're just across the engine bay, this kit instead. And then if your vehicle's auxiliary battery is in the middle or all the way at the rear of the vehicle, there's going to be different length wire. Basically, is the big differentiator here between these kits. But these make it super easy because it's an all-in-one thing, and it's going to cover the majority of what you're going to need here. Now there won't be mounting screws for mounting up like the fuse holders. You'll probably need electrical tape and maybe a few other electrical things, just depending on how your setup really is. But for the most part, this is going to cover 99% of what you need, so that way you can get it installed in your vehicle. Taking a closer look, this is a much slimmer model compared to the older BCDC chargers that are out there on the market. And you'll notice there's all these fins right here, and what that does is it provides more surface area for this to cool down. Since this is designed to go in your engine compartment where it's going to be generating a lot of heat from your engine, keeping this nice and cool so it's functioning properly is going to be a big issue. So that's why they've designed it this way, where it's thinner, so that way it's got more surface area, and then all those cooling fins to help cool it down, keep it functioning properly. So as far as installation goes, this can be a bit tricky depending on what your setup is going to be. In our Ram, kind of a lot. We did have to use this in conjunction with a lot of other things that we're installing. So we're also going to be doing the Rogue, so the total vehicle management system, which will have all of our DC stuff going to one point of contact here, and then that is all running up to our Red Vision monitor, which is also going to come into play here just because we're going to be using the Red Vision app to actually control and monitor our BCDC charger. So it does take a lot of planning, especially if this is an overlanding rig. Maybe you're just doing this in the bed of your truck kinda and setting up your camping setup in there, or maybe you have a larger van that you're going to be turning into a camper like our neighbor is today. There's going to be a lot of points where you're going to have to pivot, maybe make some changes, do things a little bit differently, come up with a different solution. So don't feel like you're doing anything wrong if you kind of get stuck in a spot here. This is one that is a little bit harder than most, just because there isn't really a lot of content out there for you to go off of and bounce ideas off of other people. So unless you're in those forums and you can really talk to some other people that have done that, you might have to really, like I said, play around with ideas and really kind of set up everything, because each one of these pieces that we're putting together has to go into a certain spot from the battery. So we're looking at, this can only sit so far away from it. Well, now I need to kind of adjust other things that I have in place just to make this work properly. With all that being said, if you don't feel like doing that with your ProMaster or whatever your rig is, then please feel free to use our dealer locator, and you can enter in your zip code and get it professionally installed. If you are wanting to do it yourself, then stick around and I'll show you how we did it in this ProMaster. Starting out our install, we're going to need to figure out exactly where our start battery is, and for our ProMaster here, it is right in the driver's seat area, so we're right under the dash here. Now we're going to need to run some cables back to our auxiliary battery, which is about halfway down our van inside in a box. So the easiest way for us to get that wiring over there is going to be for us to lift up all of this trim right here, so that way we can get it back into this channel, because further back here in the van, right past the driver's seat, it's wide open. So we can just run it along that and get it down to our auxiliary battery so that way you can charge it. So So right now we're down at the start battery. I'm trying to figure out a good spot to mount our fuse because we're gonna have a fuse plus one of these little red guys right here. So this is running from our fuse holder to our start battery. We'll have a second one of these over on our auxiliary battery as well. Problem is, super tight space here. We don't really have much room to work with. So, and the little plastic cover where they kind of mount everything for the battery is pretty tight as well. So it's not really giving me a good space to work with. I think what we'll have to do is probably trim out our plastic here. We'll mount this up. Have this curve back around. So I'll need to trim right here to allow my cable to go through. And then from there, we'll run out the red cable, which came in our wiring kit. And this is gonna sneak down under this trim here, through this trim, and then run out back to the auxiliary battery. So I'm gonna get started by just notching this out and getting our fuse holder mounted up. So now that we have this how we want it, I'm not gonna put this on just yet, just because we don't need power running to anything. And we'll have to put a fuse right here as well in our MIDI fuse holder. So in the meantime, I'm gonna take my cable, which we wanna make sure that we're using the side that goes to the fuse holder. So you can see, especially like on this cable, this is a better example. You've got a much smaller ring terminal on this side than you do on this side. So this one's running to the battery. This side, along with that one, is going to be running to our fuse holder. So we want to make sure we have the correct side. This will go up to our fuse holder right here. But like I said, we're going to run all this wiring through, and we'll show you how we ran it. So I've got my cable. I've attached it to the fuse holder just to make sure I'm not pulling too much away. I'm leaving the right amount of slack here. I went right under this little, I guess, floor piece here that has some cushion into it, so I don't have to worry about, once we're sitting here smashing the cable or anything. Down in here in the footwell, there's plenty of room as long as we stay within the space over here where the rest of the wiring is ran, to avoid that footwell box. And then I just snuck it over. We're sitting right under this point right here, and this is just kind of like a foam piece with the plastic cover over it, and it's hiding under that and coming out behind the driver's seat. Then once we got to the driver's seat, I left a little bit of slack because it's going to sit in that corner, and then once we have it all done, I'll put the plastic trim panel back in place, which will tuck that back behind it. And then at the floor, we have a good gap right between this flooring that was put in and then the actual edge of the body here. So I snuck that through there, and we just ran it straight down over to our box that houses our auxiliary battery. Now, as far as mounting hardware goes, we didn't have any included with our kit because they don't know exactly what you're going to be mounting this to. There are brackets that are made specifically for this. Typically, they're expecting you to put this in an engine compartment, though. This needs to be within so many feet of our battery, so we don't have that option. We can't put it up in the engine compartment and use one of those mounts. And honestly, we don't have too much space in this box, and we do have a couple more items that we're going to be installing as well. So I really want to limit how much I'm really having this stick out so far. So what I did was there was 2 holes in this box already. I drilled out 2 more over here to match the bolt pattern. I'm going to be using a carriage bolt going through because there's a lot of slots in here. That's going to sit in there pretty nicely and help hold it. And then on the other side, we'll have a nut to finish that off, tighten that down. So pretty limited space too, so I mean, you get the idea. It's just slotting it in and then tightening down the nuts. So we'll get this rolling, and then we can move on to hooking up some of our cables. All right, now I'm going to tighten that down. All right, now with that mounted, we can install our red cable, and that's going to have a specific screw in the kit as well to mount this up. It's hard to see if I'm lined up properly. Feels like we might be now. Yeah. So we're going to tighten that down, and now they do make this super easy for you. They have them color coded, so yellow is going to go out to our solar. We got red running to our start battery. Brown is going to run to the positive side on our auxiliary battery. Negative is going to run to ground, and then we also have a temperature sensor as well. So for our next part, we're going to have that brown wire, and that's going to run to our MIDI fuse holder. But we need this to be in a spot where we can still reach the positive side of our battery. So I believe this is about as far away as we're going to be able to get, just because the red wire that they give you to run from this over to the battery is extremely short. So get that kind of prepped. I think that's going to be our location right there. And I'm going to pre-drill this just a bit so I can run my screws through. Let's push up the holder. There we go. Alrighty. I'm going to remove that nut and split lock washer. And we can put on that little red cable we have. Alright, and I'm putting this on the bottom and my Rogue cable a little bit, or on top of it, that way. I'm assuming, if there's ever an issue with the Rogue, you'd probably be disconnecting that, but keeping the battery charger going. Fully tighten it down now. And then we'll do the same over on the fuse holder side. I'm not going to put the fuse in just yet. We'll wait until we have everything all ready to go and then put our fuses in. So for now, I'll just hand tighten that. Now on the other side, that's going to be our brown cable. So we can take off that nut and split lock washer. Set those aside. Place one of our ring terminals on, and then we'll reinstall that. And then on the BCDC side, we're going to pull out another one of our screws out of our kit here. And then our Phillips head screwdriver. We can pop this in as well, making sure that we're putting it on the brown side here. And this is going to go to positive. So for the next part, we're going to be also installing the black cable, or honestly the clear one, because it's all black casing on it. And that is going to go to the ground, or the negative on our battery terminal. And then we're supposed to have a chassis ground as well that is basically rated for whatever our size is going to be here. Now we're going to be adding in a second battery and a few other items as well. So this job kind of became a much larger project. So I'm going to have to wait on the chassis ground, but we are going to do that separately because I also have a battery monitor from Redarc as well that will also require a chassis ground. So once we do that, once we know we have everything all together and we can pick out the correct cable gauge to support that, then we'll add that in as well. So for right now, we are kind of breaking the rules and we don't have that chassis ground, but that is really just a backup in case the negative terminal on your battery is not functioning either. So we will pop this in. This is, once again, another screw, making sure that we're using the right side here because the ring terminal openings are different depending on what connection you're making. And this one's going to go to that negative spot. And I don't really like how this is going to look because this is kind of dangling all over the place. But eventually we will have a second battery in here. Over in this area, we'll build a little stand to kind of make some room between the wires. And I'll be able to move it and have it kind of sit tucked out of the way versus all the way over there like it is going to be for right now. Next, we'll do our temperature sensor. This is that little tiny black and white wire with the ring terminal, and there's going to be really tiny screws to match with it. And those are going to match up on our BCDC charger. And in the manual, they show white on top, black on bottom. So we're going to follow that too. So I grab my screwdriver. All right, now this is also going to run over to the negative post on our battery. If you have the opportunity, I would definitely get a bus bar for both your positive and negative connections to your batteries, and make sure that it's rated for the load that you're going to be running. That's going to make your life a whole lot easier, because instead of stacking up all these onto one post, you'd be putting them onto separate posts on a bus bar that you could mount, anywhere close by. So instead of having everything pop off like it's about to, just like that, I wouldn't be doing that anymore, because you'd be able to have each connection separate and then run one out to your chassis ground, just to make your life a whole lot easier. So for the next part, we are going to be installing the ignition sensor here, and basically what this is going to do is make sure that the vehicle is running. If the ignition's not on, then the Alpha is not going to be charging the battery. Now there are a couple different ways to do this depending on what kind of alternator you have. If you have a standard alternator, you don't need to use this. If you have a smart alternator, like we do with this vehicle, then you are going to need to run this one of two ways. So the first way is if this vehicle isn't going to be a start-stop vehicle, where when you get to that intersection and you're sitting there on the brakes, maybe you're waiting at a light, your vehicle shuts down and then starts back up when you start to go. So that one you're going to need to tie into the D+ on your alternator. For us, we don't have that option, so what we are doing is running to any kind of fuse that is ignition tied. So that fuse only has power when the ignition is running. So when we look inside of here, we've got a couple options. We've got this lower rack right here. All of these fuses here are tied to the ignition, and then same thing with the ones up top. If we look at these ones, so here, the vehicle's off right now. You can see these have power, so I can't use one of those fuses. But when I come down here, nothing. So that one's only going to work when we turn the vehicle on. So we're going to get a fuse tap, and while that's getting shipped over to me, I am going to start running this wire, because this blue guy right here is going to need to run all the way back to our Alpha and plug in with one of those smaller set screws. Now there is a fuse on this as well, so we are going to have to find a mounting location for this. It's probably going to be up under the dash somewhere. Probably up in here is where I can tuck it. That way I can also screw that into something. Maybe there'll be like a factory screw or bolt or something in there that I can just steal a space from and have this sit right in there. We'll crimp on our fuse tap and then tie that in with our fuses. Be all good to go. So just to give you a brief overview here, I've got this following the wire harness here, and I've zip tied it to the harness. I've ran it up under the dash. Right here there's a little metal bracket that supports our fuse box. I just bolted it right into that with a little self-tapper for that fuse. And then here is our wire running over. We're going to use a fuse tap and connect in right to this fuse here. So I'm going to pull that out. And then we will pop that into our fuse holder. I've already got another 7.5 in there. And the way this works is we'll just pop that in its place. It'll have the fuse that was originally there plus the one we just added in. Now, this isn't going to be drawing a lot. This is really just looking for power. So the second it sees power, it'll say that the vehicle is running, and then the charger can start activating. So we'll strip back our casing and wind up our wire. And then this is just going to get crimped right into the fuse holder. Give it a little tug, make sure it's good. And then I'm going to zip tie this up so that it's out of the way. But that'll do it for that connection point over here. Now we can go back to the Alpha and button everything up. All right, we're all the way down by our BCDC charger now, so we can connect our ignition wire Now I'm going to leave this loose for just now just because we are moving this box around. So once I do have this back in place, I can clean this all up because this looks like a giant mess right now. So we'll get this guy in. Now we have all of our connections made, we can throw on our fuses. So I'm going to pop off both nuts. We aren't currently set up with solar, so later on we will eventually have solar in this project as well, and that's going to want to connect right here. So the thing with solar is if the solar is putting out enough power to recharge the battery, once it senses where the battery's at and its charge rate, it can switch from pulling power from your alternator over to solar, so that way you're not pulling as much from the start battery versus the solar power here. So that just kind of helps give you an extra charge without eating as much power up from the vehicle. That split lock off. There we go. Well, we'll pop on our first fuse, and now when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you get the clear side. You see that side's closed off. That side will let you see the little fuse inside of it so that you can determine if it's blown later on. So we'll pop that in place. Put on our split lock washer and then our nut. I might need to trim a little bit more out. This cap here on our cover isn't wide enough to match up that ring terminal, so we can cut that out separate and move on. We're going to do our fuse holder that's over by our start battery as well. This is probably going to fight us as well, just because I'm going to have this slightly at an angle, so it's, and as you can see, I can't get the cap over it anyway, so we'll have to trim that out a little bit more afterwards, just so it'll match up. Get that guy on. We'll get this one on. Our fuse. And then we're going to put on our split lock and nut. And then we can tighten it down. Now with that all snug down, we can test out our system, make sure everything's functioning properly. Alright, so to set up our system so that we can test it, down here where the light's blinking, we're going to hold that on the side until you see it blinking blue. That's going to put it into pairing mode, and on the Red Vision Configurator app, which you'll need to download, you'll go to, here, I'll go back, you'll go to Read Device, and Alpha's already popped up. We'll connect to that guy. Once it pops up, it's going to ask you the serial number right there. We'll let that pair. This may take a few minutes to do. All right, now we can go in and then we can change our settings for our charger. So we've got a 150 amp hour battery, so let's up that up a bit. Max charge current's gonna be 50 amps because that's what we have. Low voltage alarm, so once it hits 10.5 volts, it's going to send an alarm out saying, hey, we need to be charged. Start battery charge mode, vehicle input, so 55. Leave that off for now. Let's save. So once you have your settings how you want them, you'll hit program. Before we do that, you can also kind of look and change over your temperature. So like when we ran that temperature sensor cable over to the negative on the battery, we can have that in the degree that we actually want. And then we'll connect to that. So it is important that you switch over everything to match what your battery's profile is. So we have a heated lithium battery, so this does have a warmer built into it. So you can see it's a smart heating. So it'll turn on an internal heater to keep the battery performing optimally even during cold conditions. Now, along with that, you can enter in your battery size, so that's your amp hours. So this guy is 150 amps. And the start battery charge mode that you see right here, you can turn that on if you have solar. I would not turn it on unless you do, because what that does is it's going to keep the start battery, which is our vehicle's battery, topped off using that solar power. So that way if you're sitting, maybe you have the car sitting for a while, it'll keep that battery topped off as well, just using that solar instead of really having to pull more from the alternator once you get moving there. So all of these settings you can also change as well on the unit itself. You'll have to hold the control button on the side here just in a certain pattern depending on which setting you're trying to change. So if you're wanting to change those settings using the control button instead of the app, definitely look at your owner's manual. It's going to tell you the sequence that you need to have this light up in, so that you can also adjust all those settings. So like, for example, max charge setting, we would hold this, and you'd see all these lights kind of come on, and it's basically going up 10% each time up to 100%. So if you were wanting to change that around, you would see these different lights light up depending on how you're pressing that button. So just to give you a little example here, we do have the vehicle running, and you can see this is the app for our battery. So it's specific to this, and it can tell you right now it is charging. We're sitting at right about 87%. And it's got that arrow going up. If we were to shut off the car, you would see that arrow go down instead, because now it is pulling power from the battery instead of charging it. And if we look over at our unit itself, you can see some lights are on right now. So right here we are showing that we're pulling power from the vehicle. So that's our start vehicle. Above that we have solar. Since we don't have anything hooked up, we're not going to be able to see that. But if you had solar panels, it would pull from those first and make that the priority before it would pull from the alternator, so that way you're not putting as much of a strain on it. If we look further down, there's the 3 modes for our charging, and the bottom right there is going to be our boost mode. Above that, we're going to have that half-filled battery symbol, and that means absorption, and then up top is float. So once you're fully charged and you're just at that point where your battery needs a little bit of a maintenance charge, you'll be sitting in that float section. And below our charging modes, we have another spot, and that is going to be in case our start battery is dead for some reason. If we let this run for about 15 minutes, it will recharge that enough to where we can start our start battery off of our auxiliary battery. So that way, if we're dead in the water in a campsite and we do still have power in our auxiliary battery, we can get that other battery going so that we can actually get out. Below that, we'll have 4 settings right here, and this is going to show you what battery type you have. So right now I have it set to heated lithium because that's what kind of battery we're using. But above that we have AGM, lead acid, that heated lithium, and then standard lithium batteries. Below that is our control button. So on the side of that, when you're going through settings, if you're not using the app, you can also use this button. You'll hit it in varying sequences. Different color lights will pop up depending on what you are trying to change. So there's going to be 2 apps that you're going to want. The first one being Red Vision Configurator. So this one, if we click on that, I already have them paired up to the Alpha, so I can change all of my settings in there. So ignition for the vehicle, input trigger, so once the vehicle's on, then it knows to kick on. That way it's not pulling power if our vehicle isn't on, and then we end up with the dead battery. Battery type, you can change that out. So we were with a heated lithium battery, then you can adjust your amperage hour. So the battery we have in there right now has 150 amp hour capacity, so we want to make sure that we are matching that so that the charger knows how to correctly charge the battery. And then we can also set a max current. So on some lithium batteries and some lead acid ones, they might not be able to take that full 50 amps. So if your specific battery, typically with lithium we find a lot of them will have a max out at about 30 amps. Then we could go and we could set that at 30 amps. So that's the max it's going to send out, because a lot of times if you have that battery where it has that issue where it's only going to accept 30 amps, if you try to send more to it, it's just going to shut it down just because it thinks it's shorting out, so it'll do that to protect itself. One other thing you can do is the low voltage alarm. So if the voltage gets down to a certain amount, whatever you choose, it's going to send you an alert. That way you know, so you don't have to worry about it. The other one is just the straight up Red Vision app, which once you pair up with the BCDC Alpha, you can look at what current's going through. So right now we have it off, so it's not sending anything, but it is still checking our battery and checking our temperature. So if the battery gets too hot, it's not going to want to charge properly. The temperature sensor that we installed with this is going to combat that by checking the temperature and making sure that it's not overheating the battery as it's charging up. You can also see that there is the charging stage right there, so it's not charging. So if we were in that float, absorption, or boost mode, it's going to stay right there. And then charging mode, you can change between that as well. If we go over to this other tab right here, and here's our solar section 2. So this will show you how much power you're using per hour. It's really helpful if you're someone who's just starting out with solar and you're really trying to narrow down what your usage is going to be, so that way you can kind of keep an eye on it. That way you can have your system hopefully last you your whole entirety of your trip. Along with that, if we go down to our system options, since we have the Alpha on here, it's also going to have this recovery mode. So that's what I was talking about before with the start battery dying. If you needed to do that, you'd come down to there, hit that button, hit start, wait 15 minutes for it to recharge the start battery, and you'd be good to go. Well, I think that does it for our look at and installation of the Redarc BCDC Alpha50 in-vehicle DC battery charger here on our 2021 Ram ProMaster 2500. My name's Kevin, and if you're still looking for the right battery charging system for your overlanding rig, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.